Welcome to Fearless Public Speaking. I'm Dr. Norma Jones, and this is Chapter 3, Language, Nonverbal Communication, and Listening, Learning Objectives. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to explain how language functions as symbolic and rule-governed, distinguish between inclusive and exclusive language choices in public speaking, identify functions and types of nonverbal communication, differentiate between informational, critical, and empathetic listening, identify ways of overcoming barriers such as noise, distractions, and biases, consider ways to give and receive constructive peer feedback. Introduction. We often take communication for granted because we start learning to speak at a very young age, sometimes before we even remember. Yet there is much more to communication than simply using words. It includes language, body signals, and listening skills working together. A message can fail to be clear if our communication signals do not align. Listening is an essential part of communication, creating reciprocity between the speaker and the audience. This chapter addresses both sides of communication. First, we will look at how you communicate through your words and nonverbal signals. Then, we will explore how you respond as a listener and feedback partner. These two sides connect to form the complete communication process. How you communicate. Language and nonverbal communication together form the foundation of human interaction. In this section, we focus on how verbal and nonverbal communication work as tools for expressing ideas, building connections, and sometimes creating misunderstandings. Language as symbolic and rule-governed. Language is a symbolic, rule-governed system for representing ideas and sharing meaning. Language is the foundation of how we communicate, but it is not as simple as memorizing words. Words are symbols, meaning they represent ideas rather than being the ideas themselves. For example, the word dog is not the animal itself. It is a sound and a set of letters we have agreed to use to represent the idea of that animal. Since the meaning is assigned to the words, we can also have multiple meanings for them. Denotative meaning refers to the dictionary definition of a word, while connotative meaning refers to the emotions, associations, and cultural understandings connected to that word. For example, the word dog has a denotative meaning, a domesticated canine, but it also carries connotative meanings depending on context. Calling someone a dog might be an insult in one culture, a term of friendship in another, or a metaphor for loyalty. For those who have dogs, the word can also carry very personal meanings. Think about it this way. My dog is the spoiled baby of my family. Some people are afraid of dogs. Dogs with jobs are service animals, therapy companions, or working partners. All of these bring additional layers of meaning to the symbol, depending on the dog's role in society and families. These associations show how one symbol can take on layers of multiple meanings based on individual experiences. These layered and multiple meanings also show how the same symbol can shift depending on the audience, culture, and situation. For example, we had a 10-year gap between dogs. During that time without a pet, our home felt emptier and we were sad. The meaning of the word dog was associated with that sadness. Now, with our current dog, he is the spoiled baby of the family, showing how personal experiences shape the meaning of the word dog. This shared agreement allows communication, but differences in interpretation can also create misunderstandings. For example, if one person calls a dog a loyal friend while another uses the word dog as an insult, the meaning shifts. This symbolic nature allows us to share abstract concepts like justice or love, but it also creates challenges when people interpret symbols differently. Language is also rule-governed. 4 major types of rules shape communication. Phonological rules govern how words sound. For example, the word read sounds different in the present tense versus the past tense. Syntactic rules structure word order. For instance, in English, we say, the dog chased the cat, rather than chase the cat the dog. Unless you are Yoda, then you might say the cat the dog chased. Semantic rules guide meaning. For example, the word bark can refer to either the sound a dog makes or the outer layer of a tree. Pragmatic rules apply meaning in context. For example, when someone asks, "Can you open the window?" the rule of context tells us they are requesting action, not questioning our ability to do so. Every day, misunderstandings often happen when these rules are interpreted differently across cultures or communities. For example, phonological differences can make an accent hard to understand. Syntactic variations can cause confusion when the word order changes. Semantic shifts can occur when the same word has multiple meanings, and pragmatic differences can lead to misinterpretation of intent. From there, a slang phrase that makes sense in one generation might confuse another. For example, the slang term cap is commonly used today to mean a lie, while no cap signals truthfulness. As a comic book fan, I think of Cap as Captain America, showing how symbols can trigger very different associations depending on personal experiences and backgrounds. Effective speakers also consider clarity, familiarity, vividness, and nonverbal signals. Clear language prevents confusion by using simple, direct wording. For example, clear language means being specific. Saying, "Please submit your outline by noon on Friday" is clearer than "make sure it's in on time." Familiar language builds connection by using words and phrases your audience already knows. For instance, college students may connect more with the phrase "study session" than "scholarly gathering." Another example is saying "grab some food" instead of "partake in a meal," or using "finals week" instead of the more formal end-of-term examinations. Sometimes, though, speakers must use unfamiliar words, such as technical terms or academic vocabulary. In these cases, it is important to explain the term in simple language, provide a comparison, or give an example so the audience can follow along. For example, if you introduce the concept of photosynthesis, you could explain it as the process by which plants use sunlight to make food, much like how people use meals to get energy. Vivid language creates mental images that bring ideas to life. For example, instead of saying "the sunset was nice," you might say, "the sunset painted the sky with streaks of orange and purple." This type of language helps the audience see, hear, or feel what the speaker describes. Since we are already engaging the sense of hearing through speech, vivid language can also appeal to the other senses: touch, taste, and smell. For instance, you might describe fresh bread as warm and soft to the touch, lemonade as tart and sweet on the tongue, or a campfire as giving off a smoky scent that clings to your clothes. These sensory details make messages more memorable and engaging. Inclusive and audience-appropriate language. Language choices impact how audiences experience our messages. For example, I was once asked, "Why do teachers of the Asian persuasion value education too much? What does that mean to you?" The words we choose shape whether our audience feels respected, connected, or excluded. Other examples include using gender-neutral terms, such as firemen versus firefighters, policeman versus police officer. Inclusive language demonstrates respect and acknowledges diversity. Exclusionary language, even if unintended, can alienate listeners. For example, one phrase I sometimes catch myself using is calling a group "you guys," which may seem casual to some but exclusive to others, while saying "everyone" or "class" can feel more inclusive and welcoming. Since I lived in Texas for over a decade, I often use "y'all," which feels more natural to me and is also more inclusive. And this is an example of how personal experience and cultural background shape our language choices. However, because I am Asian, some people react to it with funny looks or even ask me why I talk like that. This allows me the opportunity to share more of my background. This experience also shows how inclusive language is not only about word choice, but also about how audiences perceive the speaker's identity. It highlights the need for awareness, as what feels inclusive to the speaker may be interpreted differently by listeners, making it essential to adapt and consider language choices to build connection and mutual respect. Audience-appropriate language goes hand in hand with inclusivity, as it means choosing words that fit the cultural, educational, and situational context of the audience so that the messages are both respectful and accessible. Cultural context, considering the values, traditions, and norms of the audience. For example, a phrase common in one culture may carry different connotations in another. In the United States, saying break a leg is a way to wish someone good luck in a performance, but in other cultures, the phrase might be taken literally and sound harsh or confusing. Another example comes from when I lived in Texas and once used the phrase war of northern aggression in what I thought was an ironic way to describe the Civil War. While I meant it as a joke, it did not land well with my audience. This shows how language tied to regional or historical contexts can be misinterpreted, reminding us that audience-appropriate language requires sensitivity and awareness. Educational context, adapting to the knowledge level of the audience. For example, the technical term mitochondria may need explanation as the powerhouse of the cell for a general audience, but does not require that simplification for a class of science majors who already understand cell biology. Jargon is the specialized language used within a profession, industry, or community. It can be useful for experts, but confusing for general audiences if not explained. For example, the phrase Christmas tree means very different things depending on the context. For general audiences, it is a decorated tree for a specific holiday. In the energy industry, a Christmas tree is a complex assembly of valves and fittings on a gas or oil well. In drag racing, the Christmas tree refers to the starting light system that signals the start of a race. These examples show how audience-appropriate language requires awareness of when jargon and technical terms need to be explained or replaced with more accessible terms. Situational context, taking into account the specific setting, occasion, and audience expectations. For example, language used in a classroom presentation may differ from language used at home. In class, I use PowerPoint slides to keep us organized and to explain concepts. At home, that would feel out of place. Imagine if I tried to plan a day for me, my husband, and our dog with a PowerPoint. It would be awkward and probably hilarious because it is out of place. This contrast shows how situational context shapes what kind of language and communication tools are appropriate. Language and audience-appropriate choices remind us that words are not neutral. They carry history, culture, and personal meaning. By paying attention to clarity, inclusivity, and context, we make our communication more effective and respectful. In other words, how we choose words is as important as the ideas we share. Nonverbal communication functions and types. Nonverbal communication refers to the process of sending and receiving messages without using words. It includes facial expressions, gestures, posture, tone of voice, appearance, use of space, and even silence. Nonverbal communication is continuous and includes everything from facial expressions to the tone of our voice. Nonverbal communication is often more powerful than verbal messages. For example, if someone says, "I'm fine," while rolling their eyes and dramatically sighing, what would you believe? In most cases, people believe the nonverbal signals over the words, indicating that the speaker is not fine. With this in mind, let's consider these 6 functions of nonverbal communication. Repeat, using nonverbal signals to reinforce what is said verbally. For example, saying yes while nodding your head. Substitute, replacing words with a gesture or expression, such as waving instead of saying hello. Compliment, adding meaning to words with nonverbal cues. For instance, smiling warmly while thanking someone. Regulate, using nonverbal behavior to control the flow of conversation. For example, raising a hand to indicate you want to speak. Contradict, mismatch nonverbal and verbal messages when communicating. For instance, saying, "This class is so exciting," while yawning loudly and rolling your eyes. Accent, emphasizing part of a message with nonverbal cues. These include pounding the table when making a strong point or using a deliberate or dramatic pause before a keyword or concept to highlight its importance. Together, these 6 functions demonstrate how nonverbal messages work with spoken words to create meaning. To deepen our understanding, let's consider the major types of nonverbal communication and explore how each type shapes, interaction, and interpretation. Major types of nonverbal communication include kinesics, the use of body movements, gestures, and facial expressions. For example, waving hello or smiling to show friendliness. In public speaking, pacing around the stage with nervous gestures can distract the audience, while a steady stance and open gestures can build trust and connection. In some Asian cultures, the giving and receiving of business cards is treated as a formal ritual, often involving both hands and a respectful bow. People may also bow as a greeting, a sign of respect, or an acknowledgement of status. This shows how even small artifacts and gestures can carry strong nonverbal meaning and signal respect, status, and relationship. Proxemics, the use of space and environment, such as how close you stand to someone. For example, in terms of personal space, standing too close in a conversation may feel invasive, while keeping a bit more distance can signal respect or formality. In a classroom, a speaker who moves closer to the audience can feel more engaging, while standing too far back may feel distant or disconnected. The use of space can also signal power. For example, someone spreading out their belongings across a large table may appear dominant, while a speaker who takes up more stage space through movement may project greater authority. In general, the more space you take up, the more powerful you are perceived to be. Paralanguage, vocal qualities like tone, pitch, rate, and pauses. For example, a rising tone at the end of a sentence can make it sound like a question even if the words are not. Higher pitched deliveries with faster speech rates can signal excitement, while lower pitched ones with slower speech rates can be considered to be more serious. In speeches, a monotone voice can lose the attention of listeners, while a varied pitch and intentional pauses can emphasize key points and keep them engaged. Appearance and artifacts, clothing and objects that send signals. For instance, wearing a suit can signal professionalism, while wearing a team jersey can show loyalty to a sports team. Hairstyles, tattoos, jewelry, and accessories can also communicate identity, values, or group membership. Even technology, like carrying a laptop versus a tablet, can send cues about roles, priorities, or social status. For our class, we need to remove caps and hoodies so that we can clearly see your speech deliveries. Additionally, reading from phones and tablets still appears unprofessional. Use note cards instead. Haptics, the use of touch when culturally appropriate. A handshake can signal a greeting or agreement, while a pat on the back can show encouragement. When I lived in Texas, most of the people I interacted with were huggers. Additionally, a handshake accompanied by a pat on the hand can convey approval, support, or a friendly and warmer connection. Others may interpret that as a display of dominance. This reminds us to adapt based on audience norms. Chronemics, the use of time. For example, arriving early to a meeting signals respect and reliability, while being late may communicate carelessness or disrespect. In presentations, speaking too long may frustrate listeners, while finishing on time shows respect for the audience's schedule. In some cultures, being early is the norm, so being on time is actually late. In other cultures, being late is the norm. For example, I am Chinese, and we are expected to be about 10 minutes early. My brother-in-law is from Iran, and the norm for him and his friends is about 2 to 3 hours late. Nonverbal communication is a powerful part of how we send and interpret messages. It can repeat, substitute, complement, regulate, contradict, or accent what we say. Major types include body language, use of space, vocal tone, appearance, touch, and time. These signals often carry more weight than words and can reveal emotions, attitudes, or intentions. Understanding them helps us become more effective communicators. For this chapter, the emphasis is on understanding and awareness of nonverbal signals, not on practicing delivery techniques. Those skills will be addressed in a later chapter. How you respond. It is important to recognize that communication is a two-way process. You express yourself through words and nonverbal cues, but communication is not complete until you also listen and respond to others. This section highlights how you can engage as an active listener and provide effective feedback. Listening. Hearing is the physical process of perceiving sound. It is involuntary and requires no effort. For example, hearing could be when your ears pick up the sound of a car horn or music playing in the background. We can tune out what we hear. Listening takes effort and is something you choose to do. It is the active process of making meaning from what is heard. Listening can also be impacted by outside factors. Noise and distractions, such as a buzzing phone or side conversations, can pull attention away from the speaker. Internal distractions, such as stress or daydreaming, can also interfere with focus. Biases, such as assumptions about the speaker's background, appearance, or topic, can prevent listeners from fully engaging with the message. For example, if an audience member assumes a speaker who appears to be younger lacks expertise or dismisses someone because of their accent, they may miss the value of the content being shared. These barriers remind us that listening is an active choice that requires effort to overcome obstacles. From my perspective, listening is hard because unlike the other senses, we cannot simply turn it off. We can close our eyes to stop seeing, avoid touching something, avoid tasting something, and avoid smelling something. However, it is more difficult to stop our ears from hearing. In other words, we can tune out what we hear. This makes listening a skill that requires active focus and intention, not just the passive act of hearing. To help us better understand listening, let's review the stages of listening: receiving, hearing, and attending to the message. For example, imagine listening to a peer give a speech on the effects of wildfires on California and noticing that they begin by describing recent wildfires. Understanding, making sense of what is heard. In this case, connecting the wildfire example to your own knowledge of them in California. Remembering, retaining the message for later use. For example, recalling the speaker's main points about wildfires. Evaluating, judging the quality, credibility, or relevance of the message. For example, deciding whether the speaker's evidence about the wildfires is credible or not. Responding, providing feedback through verbal or nonverbal signals. For example, nodding to show agreement or asking a follow-up question about how wildfires affect local communities. Together, these stages highlight that listening is not a passive activity. Instead, it requires effort at every step. If we fail at any stage of the process, problems can appear in the next one. For example, if we do not receive the message clearly, we cannot understand it. If we fail to understand, we cannot evaluate effectively, and so on. When we recognize each stage, we become more effective at engaging with speakers, showing respect, and retaining important ideas. This is why understanding listening is essential before moving on to the specific purposes it serves. Listening can serve four main purposes. Appreciative listening to content interests or entertains you. For example, listening to your favorite musician or going to a comedy club because you enjoy the content. Informational listening to comprehend and learn. For example, when a speaker gives a presentation on AI integration in higher education, informational listening allows you to understand how AI is being used for grading, tutoring, or research support. Critical listening to evaluate ideas and credibility. In that same AI speech, critical listening means considering whether the cited sources are credible. Empathetic listening to understand feelings and perspectives. For example, if the speaker shares a story about students feeling anxious about AI replacing human interaction, empathetic listening means trying to understand those emotions and considering what that experience means for others. Listening serves many purposes, whether for enjoyment, learning, evaluating, or understanding others. Recognizing these purposes helps us become more intentional and effective listeners, which strengthens our ability to connect, respond, and grow as communicators. Active listening. Active listening means working to overcome barriers and focusing with intention. Because hearing cannot be turned off, distractions, biases, and noise are always present. Active listening helps us move past these barriers by paraphrasing ideas, asking clarifying questions, and showing responsiveness through both verbal and nonverbal cues. For example, during a classroom speech, you might nod to show agreement, take notes to keep track of key ideas, or ask a thoughtful follow-up question. These actions demonstrate effort and respect, ensuring that communication is more effective for both the speaker and the listener. Some important active listening skills include distinguishing between facts and inferences, separating what is directly stated from assumptions or interpretations. For example, in a peer's speech on AI integration in higher education, a fact might be AI is currently being used in creating educational materials, while an inference might be I will replace all professors in the future. Evaluating supporting evidence, assessing whether examples, statistics, or testimony are credible and relevant. In that AI speech, you might evaluate whether the speaker cites credible studies from universities or relies only on personal opinion. Discovering your own biases, reflecting on how your attitudes or preconceptions might shape how you interpret the message. For instance, if you are excited about technology, you might overlook risks, while if you are skeptical, you might dismiss benefits too quickly. Listening beyond the message, considering what the speaker's words imply about values, emotions, or broader implications. For example, the speaker might present data about AI efficiency, but listening beyond the message could reveal concerns about fairness, student anxiety, or the importance of maintaining human connection in education. In conclusion, active listening skills provide us with the tools to overcome barriers and truly connect with others. By practicing them, we strengthen both sides of communication, how we speak and how we respond. This prepares us to use listening with purpose in public speaking, whether to learn, evaluate, or empathize. Feedback. Feedback is the information or reactions given in response to a message or performance. It can be verbal or nonverbal, formal or informal, and it helps speakers understand how their message was received. For example, a classmate's written comments on your outline or an audience nodding during your speech are both forms of feedback. Feedback is a natural extension of active listening. It shows that the listener has processed the message and is offering a response. Feedback is an important part of the communication process, especially in a public speaking classroom. Formative feedback occurs in real time while a speech is taking place. As the speaker talks, the audience may nod, take notes, maintain eye contact, or show signs of confusion. These immediate reactions let the speaker know whether the message is being understood, accepted, or resisted, and they provide valuable clues for adjusting the presentation as it unfolds. Summative feedback occurs after the presentation. It evaluates the overall performance, highlighting what worked well and what still needs attention for future speeches. Good summative feedback is specific, balanced, and respectful. For example, saying, your introduction was clear and engaging, but you might add more evidence in the body to strengthen your argument, gives both encouragement and a concrete suggestion. In contrast, bad feedback is vague or harsh, such as, that speech was boring, or you're just not good at public speaking. Feedback is essential for growth in public speaking. Its purpose is to encourage improvement while supporting confidence. One common method is the feedback sandwich, where constructive criticism is placed between positive comments. Receiving feedback is equally important. Students who listen with openness, avoid defensiveness, and reflect on critiques often see the most improvement. Applying feedback involves revising outlines, adjusting practice strategies, and preparing differently for future speeches. Peer evaluation tools such as rubrics and guided notes help structure this process and guide students toward offering feedback that is useful and supportive. Reciprocity and the golden rule. Reciprocity highlights the balance between speaking and listening. As speakers, we hope our audience will give us their full attention, and as listeners, we owe that same respect to others. The golden rule reminds us to treat others as we want to be treated. In communication, this means using inclusive and respectful language, showing attentiveness through nonverbal cues like eye contact and nodding, and offering constructive feedback instead of harsh criticism. For example, if you want your peers to listen without interrupting when you present, you should extend that same courtesy when it is their turn. Practicing reciprocity and following the golden rule creates environments in which communication supports trust, understanding, and growth. But what about the opposite? When reciprocity and the golden rule are ignored, communication can break down. Interrupting, dismissing, or using disrespectful language in nonverbal communication creates barriers and erodes trust. Instead of connection, the result is misunderstanding, frustration, or conflict. Reflecting on these opposites reminds us why reciprocity and respect are so important in communication. Conclusion. Communication is holistic because language, nonverbal cues, and listening are deeply connected. Effective communication requires awareness of both how we send messages and how we respond when others share with us. In this chapter, we examine language as a symbolic, rule-governed system, explore denotative and connotative meanings with personal and cultural examples, and considered how inclusive and audience-appropriate language builds connection. We analyze nonverbal communication through its 6 functions and major types, noting how these cues often carry more weight than words. We review the stages and purposes of listening, recognize common barriers, and practice strategies for active listening. We also studied how feedback, both formative and summative, helps speakers improve, and how reciprocity and the golden rule remind us that respect should guide both speaking and listening. And as you reflect, consider not only the words you choose, but also the signals you send and the way you listen to others. By making these connections between expression and response, you can strengthen your skills as a communicator in academic, professional, and personal settings. I am Dr. Norma Jones. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Fearless Public Speaking.